Welcome back to smarthelping.com. Don't forget to subscribe. We're going to go over the bike shop 5-year financial model. I've been building it live on the live streams Monday at 5 p.m. EST the last 2 weeks, and it's done. So what I'll do is walk through each of the assumptions, and then we'll go through just how to use it and how everything links together. So first off, you'll start in the control tab, define timing assumptions when the start date of the forecast is. Uh, Exit month if you plan on exiting with the exit value, or you could hit NA if you're not. And then after you do these first, this top section, you're going to go through and fill out the rest of the assumptions, which I'll go through these in a second, and that will produce a P&L and result in some equity contribution required. And then you'll see that number right here. And then if you want to raise any senior debt, you can put that in here and that's going to reduce the initial startup cost. And then you can figure out from there how much you plan on raising investors, or if none, it'll all float to owner's equity. But that's just solving for the minimum equity required to survive based on all the assumptions, which will account for startup costs and any burn. Um, okay, so first revenue assumptions. So for a bike shop, we just did three different categories of bikes, and each category's got five bike types. I also did five others if you want to account for sales of parts and accessories. And the inputs are pretty simple. You could define the start month of each. If they all start in the same month, just select, whatever month, and um, you can fill that out. You want to define your starting monthly sales, and then the percentage that those sales are going to grow each month over 5 years. So here we're starting at, electric bikes type 1, 10 a month, and it's going to increase by 5% per month in year 1, and then 2% per month in year 2, etc. And that's a compounding growth rate. So I try to make it as simple as possible, but kind of smooth and just showing that you're going to start with some low amount and eventually grow as you get more popularity. Uh, Average selling price, so this is what you're charging for each bike type, and then the markup, and this is going to define your cost of goods sold based on whatever you're marking things up by. And you'll just want to put in numbers here that make sense to you. So what are you paying for it? What do you plan on selling it for? And then this margin is going to define what you're paying. Next we got, so bike shop's going to have repairs and services, so you can pick the start month of that as well. And the reason why we have start months here is because the model defaults to the first month of the year defined here. So your revenue might not start necessarily in January. So you could pick whatever's the sales you think will start happening. Anyway, repair services up to 5 types, and that's defined by the count of repair work done per month for each type and the average ticket value for those repairs. So that's all the revenue. Cost is pretty simple. You've got, and you can zero out everything that doesn't matter. But you can define different sales and marketing costs, G&A, R&D stuff. You can change the names of all these, put the start date, and put the fully loaded monthly cost of each one, and you can change that on a yearly basis. You've also got one-time startup costs, which could be anything up to 16 there, and then future capex if you plan on the capital expenditures happening over the life of the model in one-time items in a given month in the future. We've also got so function total monthly revenue. This would be things like credit card fees, but any cost that is not already accounted for that you want to define, it's almost like a catch-all for just something that's the percentage of revenue that you haven't defined elsewhere. You can catch it here. Also, we've got another cost of goods sold is freight and shipping. So this is going to define, and usually it'll be your freight cost is going to depend on the units purchased, and we've got a lot of logic going on for how many units have to be purchased based on expected sales and how much inventory you're buying in advance, and all that logic works out here. And this is a lookup to figure out what your freight cost is on each order. Uh, and so here's actually the inventory logic. And you can see you could put in the months that you want to buy inventory in advance for here, and it's going to start in year 0 and go based on your expected sales. So if you don't have any sales, until, let's say, March, let me just copy and paste this to each of these. Then this, you can see there's not anything going on until February, which is you're buying things 1 month in advance of needing it here. So essentially, we're buying in February, and that should hold us for 2 months. March, April, and then April we run out, we order again, and that's for May and June. So all that logic is dynamic. This is just the logic to figure out. We had to do some offsets here, a lot of complex stuff, but essentially, this cost of goods sold is based on all these numbers here and based on the sales. And this is just the bikes. It does not include freight because freight's actually paid in the month it happens. So we don't need to, for the cash flow purposes, it doesn't matter. But for cost of goods sold, that's happening when the bike's sold, but that's not necessarily when the cash went out to purchase these, unless you're buying all your inventory just in time, which in that case, you could just put a 1 here. And and if it's a 1, you're basically, it's just 1 month offset, but it's the same number as the next month. Put this back to like 3. Um, so we've got the actual cost of goods sold that are shown up in the pro forma. Then we've got when you're actually purchasing these things. And then we've got units sold, and then when the units are actually purchased, and then that is what we use in the lookup table to get the cost of goods sold for freight. So that's looking up this number against this table to get a freight cost. And you could define these however you want. It just depends on your situation. So those are all the assumptions. When you fill it out, you can see the monthly P&L detail here shows the revenue and based on all the units of all the different bikes sold over time, based on all the assumptions, total number of sales. Here's the actual revenue for each. Sales revenue, I did average revenue per unit sold, repairs and services, and then total revenue. Then you've got your cost of goods sold, which is defined by the unit count sold against this cost here. Now this cost is just year 1. So in year 2, when the price, if the price changes, or year 3 or 4 or 5, and that could change for a whole bunch of reasons, like if you think you're going to sell more of a different type of bike over time, or something, because these bike categories could have multiple bikes in them, and you're just doing an average. Um, but it's using the 70% against the price to figure out this in each of these calculations for the cost of goods sold. So then we've got cost of goods sold for bikes. We got freight, and down below in the cash flow, we'll add this back and then reduce the actual purchases to get the correct cash flow. Freights just happens in the month you're seeing here. Um, let's see here, and this is actually inventory C. We're actually offset this because this is happening in year 0 for the very first one. So let's put this over here. There we go. Because it's very important to get the cash timing correct here. Now this can flow down to initial startup costs. So it's accounted for here. We'll add it in. Actually, let's see, inventory. initial purchase. So this is just the first purchase. The rest of the data is calculated in the model, but we need to put that here. And then for cash flow, we'll just subtract that out. Now for the rest of the calculations, this after you see all the fixed costs, our EBITDA is calculating gross profit less all the fixed costs, OPEX. And this, you can see the gross profit is taking total cost of goods sold less the total revenue, and this is already accounted for the freight. So the freight's getting accounted for there. We just had to look at this very first one if there is a year zero freight. Okay, then we got debt service. If there is debt, let's put a number in here just so that shows. You can see that'll be principal and interest, total debt service, debt proceeds, debt balance over time. Then you've got CapEx, startup costs, debt repayment, which is automatically happening if there is an exit month chosen. Any remaining debt that's there will come off of the proceeds when we look at cash flow. The exit's just based on the trailing 12-month EBITDA times the multiple here. I did a EBITDA multiple because for a bike shop, in my opinion, it made more sense. Now, some businesses might use a multiple of revenue, but I felt like it was more relevant to use EBITDA for like a brick and mortar bike shop. We got freight, which we just added. We're adding back cost of goods sold here and then subtracting out the actual purchases. Then you've got cash flow, equity funding, and cash balance. The annual P&L is the same exact thing, but it aggregates everything. Visuals, a couple key metrics here. Bike sold by type, bike sales revenue by type, annual cash flow, and cumulative cash. We got an executive summary that shows the annual basis of the key like revenue, gross profit, all your OPEX, percentage of revenues, EBITDA, debt service coverage, profit margins, other cash flow items, and then this all ties out to the same cash flow that you see in the monthly. At the end, 12,165, and this is 12,001. Oh, we got to add in the. Let's see where we're going to put that freight. Month 0 freight. So we got to put this in here, which is going to be this. And then subtract that. There you go, 12,165,914. 12,165,914. And then the annual, we got to also add that. Yep, our checks are off because of that 5,000. So let's add it to down here. Where did I put in the monthly of add back? Month 0 freight. And that could be 0 if you don't start operations until Feb or March or April and you're buying stuff only 1 or 2 months in advance. Then it won't even show in month 0, but in this case it does. I'm going to put this back to January as well. And then we got to subtract this out. Now this, okay, so this matches, right? Now what are we off by here? This minus, and these sanity checks are always really important. All right, so it's off by like, I'm assuming some amount of really small digit. see all zeros there. 293, 10,855, 735. Well, it must be, it can't even recognize how many decimals. It's got to be something with the math or the rounding or just Excel because it was literally 15 zeros and it was all zeroed out. So we'll just do this minus this equals 0. This minus this. So these should both equal 0. So there's that check. 12,168, 12,168. Sometimes Excel's weird with that really, really high decimal places. You could see a slight error, but you can see if you go out, a bunch. This is all 0, so it matches. Okay, and so executive summary. You've got some project level information, inventory, investor and owner information for internal rate of return, equity multiple, cash returned, ROI. Distributions is just showing the project level, what cash was needed, what cash is able to be returned, what's the net present value of that happening, and then same thing for the investor and owner, how much cash are they contributing, what's their net present value based on a discount rate, and a chart to show investor versus owner cash flow if there is an investor. If there's not, you can zero it out. All right, that's the overview. Follow the link in the description box below if you want the template. It's going to be a one-time fee of $45, and we'll see you on the next one.